Reacting to events is an important first step. How can we now change what shows up on the screen? Well, we want to change the title when the button is clicked. So here's one thing we could do. We could create a variable with let, which we maybe name title, and initially that holds the value we find in props title. And then we use this title variable down there in our JSX code to output the title. Now, if I do that, we see the same result as before. So why am I doing that? Well, since it's a variable, we could change it whenever this click handler executes. So whenever this button is clicked, we execute this click handler function. And in there, if we now change title to updated, then we should see that changed title on our screen, right? Because we're outputting title down there, we're changing it up on a click. We should see that value here in this place after such a click happened. Well, let's save everything and give it a try. If we go back, you'll notice that if I click change title, nothing happens. I can hammer this button and nothing happens. This title here never changes. So why is this happening? Is something wrong with our click handler? Well, this function is getting triggered. I can prove this. If I console log the title here after we changed it, you will notice that if I now go back and reload, if I click change title, we see that updated title text here. So it looks like it worked. The click handler clearly executed and title clearly was changed. Otherwise, we wouldn't see that new value, which we assign here in line 13, once we log it in line 14. So if the function executes and the title is changed, why don't we see that reflected in our DOM? After all, we are outputting the title down there in line 21. Well, simply because React doesn't work like this. And that's where I now have to dive into how React actually parses the JSX code and how it considers that and how it brings it onto the screen. Though I will have an even deeper dive later in the course. But there's one key thing which you have to know right now. Keep in mind that your component is a function. This is a function, right? Your component is just a regular function. The only special thing about that function is that it returns JSX. Now, since it's a function, someone has to call it. And you might notice that we never called our component functions. Instead, we just use these functions like HTML elements in this JSX code. Well, the thing is, under the hood, this is almost like a function call. By using our components in JSX code, we make React aware of our component functions. For example, here, we make React aware of the expense item function. And whenever React evaluates this JSX code, it will call these component functions. And these component functions then return JSX code, which is also evaluated, up until there is no more JSX code to be evaluated. So React keeps on calling any component functions it encounters in JSX, then calls any functions that those functions might have returned, so any elements those components might have used in their JSX code, until there are no more functions left. So in the case of expenses.js, if React encounters this expense item, it calls this expense item component function, executes all the code in there, encounters this JSX code, and calls this card function and this expense date function. And then it goes through the JSX code of these components until there is no more component code left to call. And then it evaluates the overall result and translates that into DOM instructions, which renders something like this on the screen. That's how React works. Now it's all started by the index.js file, where we initially point at this app component. That's the first component function which is being called. And that happens when the React app is being loaded on the screen, which happens when the page is being visited. So that is how React goes through all these components, executes all these component functions, and draws something onto the screen. The only problem with that is that React never repeats that. React goes through all of that when the application is initially rendered, but thereafter it's done. However, in modern applications, of course, you sometimes want to update what's visible on the screen. For example, because a button was clicked and that button should change some text which is being output. So we need a way of telling React that something changed and that a certain component should be re-evaluated. And that's where React introduces a special concept called state.